Okay, so welcome to ALT in Chile, podcast about teaching English in Chile and also, many different parts of the world. In this space, I talk to teachers, teacher trainers, and experts who would like to share their experiences and expertise regarding English language teaching, not only in Chile, but also around the world. Here we talk about linguistics, language learning, how people experience language, And in this episode, I'll be talking to Professor Adolfo Garcia. Adolfo holds a PhD in language sciences and specializes in the neuroscience of language and communication. This is going to be long because Adolfo has done many things. He serves as the director of the Cognitive Neuroscience Center, Universidad de San Andrés, Argentina, senior Atlantic fellow at the Global Brain Health Institute, University of California, San Francisco, associate researcher at Universidad de Santiago de Chile, where we are colleagues, and adjunct researcher at the National Scientific and Technical Research Council in Argentina, president of the Translation Research Empiricism Cognition TREC Network, and honorary member of the Center of Cognitive Neuroscience at La Laguna University, Spain. And finally, high-level talent appointed by the Ministry of Science and Technology of China. Moreover, he's the founder of Include, a global network for cross-linguistic research on brain health, and the creator of the app Toolkit to examine lifelike language. That's, it's called TEL. From 2021 to 2022, he serves as the director of language science at Redden Lab, Australia. He has received training in cognitive neuroscience, translation, and foreign language teaching, alongside postdoctoral studies at the Institute of Cognitive Neurology in Argentina and research stays at New York University and Rice University in the US. His teaching career includes graduate and postgraduate courses in Argentina, Chile, Colombia, the United States, Germany, the United Kingdom, and China. He has more than 200 publications, including book chapters, papers, and leading journals, mainly focused on neurolinguistics and bilingualism. He has offered more than 220 presentations and talks at international academic meetings and scientific science dissemination events, including in TechX Talk with a live audience of 12,000 people, which is something that maybe you can mention. Of course, we can include a link to that. So thank you, Adolfo, for accepting my invitation to the podcast. And of course, I have many questions for you. So let's get started. How are you, Adolfo?
Fantastic. Thanks. Thank you very much for this invitation. It's great to wrap up the year with this opportunity to share some views and ideas. So thank you.
Yeah. So Adolfo, I know that I read your resume. Of course, you have many more publications and many more things. So I tried to summarize that. But I know that you're a certified translator and English teacher. So how did you become interested, and involved in language in general? Can you tell me about this journey a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I'm not a certified translator. I hold a degree in technical scientific translation, which is not exactly the same thing. In Argentina, there's actually, it's a collegiate profession. So you actually have certified translators who can actually attest to the if you want, the lawfulness of the documents that are translated. So that's not me. Nothing that involves lawfulness falls within my purview, basically. Yeah, so I don't know. It's those questions. How do you first become interested in something? They're so tricky because we are often quite blind to how these things happen. And in general, or at least in my case, there was a combination of chance and deliberate search. And also, when one is faced with these retrospective questions, we are so good at coming up with coherent stories, that make everything look as if they made sense, right? So this is just a little disclaimer that I may be falling prey to some of these biases, but I guess I've always had a thing for language, for language-based humor, punning, twisting around the possibilities of grammar and the lexicon. Just even going back to primary school and high school, I still have this notebook where I would write all sorts of stupid jokes, and they were all mainly based on linguistic tricks and maneuvers, if you will. Then at some point, I was I faced the need to say, hey, you need to make a living, right? And my main fascination in life is music, and I was actually working and studying to become a professional musician. but I realized that because of the kind of music that I was into, I was gonna find it difficult to indulge in certain luxuries, such as eating, for example.
And
So I said, okay, why don't I try to make a living out of things that I feel I have something of a knack for? And language was one of those things. So I signed up for this technical and scientific translation program. And I realized that there was something called linguistics, and that there were such people as linguists, very obscure folks who devoted their lives to studying language and coming up with ideas about language. And what do you know? They actually got to travel around the world to talk about language. And I said, okay, now that sounds like an interesting way of, spending your time here on Earth. So I started studying linguistics pretty much on my own, in addition to the things that I was doing on these courses. And then little by little, I started building up a career around that, until the point where I realized that I needed to learn about the brain if I were to understand language in terms that I was comfortable with, and that really resonated with me. So I started studying cognitive neuroscience. This is, of course, the very, very blurb-like response to that question, but that was it.
yeah, there is usually something. I mean, for many people has been music, for some people has been, video games, for some people has been, talking to somebody and then realizing that they speak another language that they cannot understand. So there is something, it's kind of funny to hear, let's say, the how people, it's usually chance, or like life, or like you said, trying to make a living. But also, yeah, the word, like, let's say, linguistics, it's a pretty, it's like an attractive word. You're like, oh, you would like to know more about it, and then you would like to see what these people do, you know. And then I know that, well, you taught in high school, right? In
I did. I my first, I mean, other than private lessons, my first formal teaching experience was I was a substitute teacher for half of a semester in for third graders, and I have empirical evidence that I am the very worst third grade teacher to have ever existed. I was actually teaching English, and it was a disaster. I remember looking at other uh, professional third grade teachers around me, and my God, I mean, that was. I would like to take this opportunity to apologize to those students that had to sit in a class with me. After that, I did 1 year of teaching in high school. It was the senior year for these high schoolers, and it was a very weird experience, basically because I was only maybe 3 years older than they were, and I felt closer to them generationally in terms of interests than distanced from them in terms of the teacher-student relationship and the uh, I don't know, apparent asymmetry that needs to be part, at least, of some of those relations. I guess the first summary of what I did there was I was teaching English, yes, but also many of those students, they just didn't care at all about English, and I was not about to play the sergeant role. So to those who wanted to learn English, we had our English lessons, but for those who didn't, I came up with a sort of parallel curriculum where I taught them about the history and the organization of heavy metal, which is one of my fascinations. And then a few years later, I remember this movie School of Rock
yeah,
came out,
yeah.
but I did it before. Nobody knows,
So,
but I did it before.
so probably, yeah, it was based, it was based on your life experience. and and Adolfo, how did you move from, or how do you go from teaching to, what you're doing now, to like neurolinguistics and, studying the brain?
Yes. So uh, right after I learned about linguistics, and I sort of had the the realization that that was going to be sort of a path for me to follow, I started studying linguistics. I signed up for the EFL teaching course program. Actually, not so much because that was an end to me, but actually because it was more of a means to be able to access research grants and fellowships and things like that, so as to start building a career around science. And I started doing that based on classical approaches to linguistics and translation studies, which was one of the things that I started off with. And I started writing papers even when I was an undergrad student, and some of those papers were published. And folks at New York University, NYU, they reached out to me. There was this transdisciplinary research group that was just building up, involving neuroscientists, neuropsychologists, neurologists, neurosurgeons, and they were interested in language assessments, language therapy, and they needed someone with a background in linguistics, bilingualism, and translation, because they had these quite abundant bilingual populations in New York. Second generation immigrants or things like that, heritage speakers of Spanish. And so they contacted me, and I in my first trip to work with them, I had this sort of epiphany when I was actually witness to this direct brain stimulation session. Basically, there's a person wide awake, but his scalp was removed, and you can apply electrical shocks on certain parts of the cortex, and you can see whether those electrical shocks actually interfere with certain cognitive functions. The one that they were interested in was language. So this very unique thing happened. I mean, I had never seen anything like this before. So there's this bilingual man around 80 years old, scalp removed, brain out there in the open, and they would show him pictures. And they would ask the person to name the picture in both Spanish and English, right? So they show him a picture of a cup, and they apply a little electrical shock somewhere and on the brain, and he goes vaso cup. All right. Then they move the electrode. Stimulation is applied somewhere else. They show him the picture of a cat, so he goes gato cat. All right. Now they move the electrode somewhere else. They apply simulation, and they show him the picture of a car, and the guy goes auto. So what happened there? That was the very first time that I learned, and it was not encyclopedic learning. It was just right there, first-hand experiential learning. Hey, language has such organization in the human brain that some particular circuits may be distinctly involved in processing words from your second language, but not your first language. And that was just a game changer for me.
And then you saw you had like this sort of epiphany. You said like, oh, that's something I would like to know more of. That's something you wanted to study.
Exactly. At that point, it was like very clear. I mean, there was this vague notion I had about something called neurolinguistics, and neuroscience, and I said, okay, that's it. So I started from scratch. I mean, basically, and it was a very, very intense period of just very compulsive and disorganized reading and studying on my part. And I wrote my first paper on neurolinguistics based on a theory from one of my early mentors, Professor Sidney Lamb, who was is the creator of a stratificational grammar, and who actually founded the linguistics department at Yale University. And so he was working at Rice University at the time, and I sent him this paper alongside a translation into Spanish of a chapter from his most well-known book. And he got back to me and he said, hey, this is quite good. We should get this paper published. And I'm gonna have the translated chapter read by a colleague of mine who's proficient in Spanish. But in the meantime, would you like to come work with me for a while? I was an undergrad student. I had no money. Of course, I said yes. I spent absolutely the entirety of my savings just to be able to spend 3 months there in Houston doing this PhD course with him. And it was a fantastic experience. And that was just everything was both downhill in terms of the decision making process as to what I was going to do, but uphill in terms of the challenges that it involved.
Yeah, absolutely. And probably, you know, when you talk, let's say to people, I know that you specialize in bilingualism and neurolinguistics. How do you explain, let's say, what you do to somebody who doesn't know so much about it? Because it's kind of funny when we say, yeah, most people think that we just like teach English and we teach like grammar and things like that, but we do much more than that. How do you explain, let's say, what do you do, Adolfo?
I don't usually explain what I do because nobody cares to ask me. So this is this is a first timer for me, Jose Luis. Thank you. What an unusual circumstance to find myself in. So what I do is basically everything that I do revolves around this question. Right now we are talking,
Yes.
and you are capable of understanding what I'm saying, or at least coming up with an idea of what it is that I may be trying to convey. And also, you're capable of somehow moving your mouth and producing fluctuations in the air that then lead to linguistic messages, right? All right. Do we believe that the brain has something to do with that, or is this something that happens magically out of its own accord or without relying on the brain? I think we would all agree that the brain probably plays a major part in it. All right, that's very good, but that's very vague. So, what is that role? How is it that the brain intervenes in the processes that are involved in language production, comprehension, acquisition, learning, and also how does language become dysfunctional upon sustaining brain damage? And more particularly, all of these things intersect with bilingualism. So all of these questions then have sort of a second layer to them, which is how does a single brain handle comprehension of input in two different languages or more? How does the brain manage to suppress one language in the case of a bilingual when that person is trying to restrict her or his communication to only the other language? How are languages connected in the brain? What is the magical neural circuitry by which you're able to perceive, listen to, read input in one language, and then convert whatever interpretation, rendition, or summary of that information you came up with into another language? So that's basically what I try to do. And to do this, what we do is we use the whole gamut, the whole repertoire of tools of cognitive neuroscience. So anything from measuring how fast or slow people respond to certain stimuli using computer programs to measuring electrical brain activity patterns as people are doing these things, to measuring how thick or the walls of their brains are, in a way, if you want to call them that, right? How dense gray matter is accumulating in different brain regions or not, how different brain areas become active and inactive, or how intensely they couple, or how they decouple as we are doing whatever it is that we are doing in terms of language and bilingual processing in general. So that would be it. But the one liner would be, what I do is I try to understand how the brain plays a role in everything that characterizes bilingual communication.
And that's very, I mean, interesting. I mean, there are so many things that probably that you've learned, you know, regarding language learning and their brain. Besides, that epiphany that when you saw, this person being, like, I don't know, there were some experiments being carried out. what's something that's been, let's say, very, very fascinating or surprising for you, let's say, when you, now that you've been studying the brain, what's something that you would say is like, oh, this is something that's fascinating?
All right, yeah, many things. The maybe one of the most engaging things is actually the one that sort of prompted my what's been my main line of work so far, which has to do with the following. Let me frame it in the guise of a question, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
So, right now we're talking, Jose Luis, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm producing what you might call words,
Mm-hmm.
one way or another. Let's not get into philosophical discussions about that. And you're understanding what I'm saying, right? I mean, I can see you nodding, and this conversation is flowing. Um, how do you think you understand what I'm telling you? What happens in your head? If you had to give me your explanation, if I tell you, for example, this: Lionel Messi uh, kicked the ball and scored the best goal in the World Cup. What do you think's happening in your head for you to understand what I just said?
I mean, I just like your words have been like triggering some images, in my, like, all this knowledge I have of, for example, Lionel Messi. I'm a football fan, so it's like when you say kicked, I can see the image of like kicking like very quickly, and then like a ball, and also, and I see some Argentinian things like medias lunas, so I start seeing images are coming to my mind, like quickly, very quick, like triggers, like.
You see these images, and we have that feeling, and sometimes we feel like there's a theater where you see
Yeah.
things, right? And oftentimes the lexicon and word meanings are described in different theories as sort of self-contained entities. If you take a look at the I don't know if you remember the movie Inside Out,
Yeah.
right? I mean, memory is depicted as a collection of shells with balls that contain
Different
memories,
colors,
right?
yes.
Right. And sometimes, even quite popular mainstream theoretical models of the lexicon, they're not much different from that. And sometimes you get the feeling that, oh, a word sort of uh, primes one of these dictionary entries, one of these balls, and I get all these imagery in my head. And one of the things that I learned while working in neuroscience, and that I do a lot of research in now, is the following. When you move your leg, if you were to kick a ball, Jose, when you run, when you walk, the fact that you're able to physically initiate that movement, control that movement, monitor that physical motion of your legs has to do with a certain with certain circuitry that we can very broadly call motor networks in your brain. And what is fascinating to me is this: when you listen to me say Lionel Messi kicked the ball, that word kick and that comprehension that you can derive from it, that happens partly because you have this activation of this very same circuits that enable you to move your legs
My legs.
physically. And there's evidence that shows that when you have words that are related to olfaction, that convey like strong senses of smell, like vanilla or cinnamon, things like that, your olfactory brain circuits light up
Light
distinctly.
up. Yeah.
When someone mentions a part of your face, right, the very I don't know, words like nose or cheeks or mouth or things like that, you have a differential response in your brain of the same circuits that enable you to perceptually identify faces, right? So language, we come to realize, is sort of a of a little hijacking trick that we have to reach into uh, the core of non-linguistic mechanisms in, in our experience. Language is sort of a shorthand that we have to implant or reactivate, if you will, experiences, sensory, motor, and situated experiences with the world. And that is just fascinating because it shows you that language is this quite complex phenomenon, which is both cultural and biological, that in a way is one of the key interfaces that we have between our phenomenological experience and the biological grounding that our organism endows it with.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds, let's say, fascinating. Of course, like trying to see how the brain works, let's say, connected to language. And I have some questions, let's say, prepare for that. But I would like to talk about your teaching a little bit. Let's say when you teach, let's say, probably if students, let's say, sign up for a course that has, a specific name, let's say, what do students expect going to your lectures or to your courses? Like, do they say like, okay, I'm here to learn, or they know nothing, or some people let's say, know a lot about, let's say, your lectures or courses?
I guess that varies a lot. So when I teach cognitive neuroscience of language, uh, usually at the undergraduate level, students come with little to no background at all.
Mm.
When I'm doing this at a postgraduate level, then usually the scenario is different. Even if people have no direct background in neurolinguistics, usually the postgraduate level, you have people who come with a medical background, or maybe who even have a master's in neuropsychology at large, or things like that. So the first thing I would say is that I have only very few one size fits all resources in my teaching tricks. Uh, and then most of the things, they are sort of ad hoc adaptations to the actual class that I'm facing. I also teach other things. For instance, I mean, lately I've been doing these courses on academic and scientific writing. Uh, and that's an entirely different thing. It's a
Yeah.
more hands-on workshop type teaching and learning experience. So it really changes a lot. I guess uh, if I were to point out to a couple of things that sort of cut across these different teaching settings that I find myself in, are the following. First of all, I like to have no room for improvisation in the way in which the classes are structured.
Uh-huh.
So from day one, I've laid out everything that we're going to do in the entire program, to the level of how we're going to be using the first hour of this class, the second hour of this class. That works for me. But this sort of comes with this contrast to the way in which I approach what I do in that hour, which is as improvised as I can.
Mm-hmm.
So I have the roadmap of what I'm going to do, but then within that 1 hour in which I know I'm going to be addressing topic A, it's pretty much free flow for me. Basically, because I've learned that about myself, I am less bad at teaching when I do it that way than when I try to have a completely pre-rehearsed lesson. Humor is fundamental. It not just because of the social dynamics and sort of uh, uh, co-constructive atmosphere that you can create interpersonally with it, but also because it's a very good anchorage for new information. We tend to remember things that have been framed within a humorous situation better than those that were presented in a, let's say, emotionally more neutral context. Of course, the same could be true about very negative emotions. The things that happen to us, that we go through when we are under lots of stress or extreme fear, you will never forget those. Those stick with you. But then again, I realize that it's very counterproductive to try to scare people away when you are in a lesson. So humor tends to be the weapon of choice.
Absolutely.
And I am very, very I have major disbelief about the value of exams in general. I can see some very small utility in them, but I think that they are overvalued in curricular design in general, and they tend to be sort of the gatekeepers of how students fare when they complete a course. So I rely more on continuous assessment than on exams. And oftentimes, I just frame exams as a sort of a regulatory excuse that we need to comply with. But I try not to leave the bulk of the final score of student be dictated by what happens in that snapshot
Exactly.
of the final test.
And also that's something that can be affected by so many factors, you know, like something negative or something positive. You can have a good day or a bad day, and that can ruin your entire semester, basically.
Absolutely, and just as you wouldn't judge uh, uh, Steve Vai or John Petrucci or any fantastic prog metal guitarist by how they fared on one single night,
Yeah.
but rather, you judge how fantastic or not they are based on their entire career and their accumulation of live shows on different stages night after night. Why should it be any different
Yeah.
uh, for teaching, right? If you really want to think about what you are doing as something that's going to be of actual value, of actual ecological value in daily life, as opposed to sort of uh, a mere performance
Yeah.
test.
Absolutely. You know, like I think like 2 months ago, I was, invited to give a talk in English, and students had to interpret, in real, let's say, in real time what I was saying. And I was tired. I imagine that the students were also like the interpreters were very, let's say, exhausted. They did very well, but I would say that interpreting, it's one of the most demanding cognitive tasks, I usually see. It looks as something that's quite simple when people are good at it, but I don't know. Would you say that that's a very demanding task for your brain, or what have you, let's say, researched? What goes through the brains of interpreters?
I would say it's a very demanding activity. Interpreters would say it too. People who've had no prior experience with interpreting and they try to do it would attest to it as well. People who are training to become interpreters and they go through the first um, instances of in booth practice will tell you it's just killer. And there's research that actually attests to this. A few years back, this report was released where they tried to rank the most stressful professions in the world, and simultaneous interpreting was ranked third
Mm,
among all professions. So if you want to know what the first two were, number two was air controllers, so people
mhm.
who must make sure that two planes do not
Planes
crash in the
don't
air,
crash.
right?
Yes.
And number one was skyscraper window cleaners.
Yeah, makes sense.
So cleaning windows on a 57th floor out there in the open. Two, keeping planes from crashing and having, I don't know, 700 people die at once. And then comes simultaneous interpreting.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, that's why if you look at the ranking, probably, yeah, it makes sense that it's a difficult, job. And I don't know, have you ever studied that, let's say, in terms of what happens in the brain of interpreters?
Yes, yes, yes. It's I don't think we can call it an incipient line of research anymore, but neither can we call it a full-fledged research tradition.
Uh-huh.
At this point, the literature probably has as many as maybe 100 papers out there
Mm,
looking into the cognitive and neural particularities of people with expertise in simultaneous interpreting relative to other populations. Why do I put it like this? Because it's not only about studying professional
mm.
interpreters, but also about studying students who are in the process of obtaining their interpreting license. So yeah, basically what you do in this research is you have a group of people with experience in simultaneous interpreting, and then a group of people who are bilingual or multilingual, but who lack such an experience. The underlying question is, okay, so since simultaneous interpreting is such a cognitively demanding task, right? will the sustained exercise of that very demanding task have an impact in the way in which you think, you process information, and even more so, in the way in which your brain is physically structured and functionally organized? And the answer to all of these questions is yes. So just to give you a couple of examples from the literature, if I give you a few phone numbers right now, Jose Luis, right? I give you maybe my phone number with country code, area code, all 14 digits on it. Uh, and um, and you don't have your computer at hand. And neither do you have a pen or piece of paper.
No.
So you have to go downstairs where you have something that you can actually use to write it down. What are you going to be doing from now till you get to that point? Yeah, if I tell you that number.
I'm going to be like trying to think of ways to, like try to remember it, or trying to maybe repeat it, or, or
Exactly.
thinking about that.
Exactly. So most likely you're not going to be out there just saying it out loud. Most likely you're going to be sort of having this inner voice,
Yeah.
Repeat that number. Okay, that's called phonological working memory, basically, or short-term memory in this case. And if you compare the ability and the capacity of short-term memory retention in simultaneous interpreters versus other bilingual or multilingual populations, they will beat you. They are better at it. If you measure how fast they are at finding the equivalent or potential equivalent of a certain word in one language in the other, they will do it faster than you. If you give them, for instance, tasks that require handling two streams of processing at the same time, such as recognizing certain sounds in the midst of certain visual shapes, you have like two parallel task schemas going on, they will beat you. And the reason for this, but they will not beat you at everything. For instance, if you give them a written word, and you ask them, okay, read it as fast as you can, they will not do it faster than you. If you show them a picture and you tell them, name that picture as fast as you can, they will not do it faster than you. And when you think about this, and you think about the interpreting task itself, interpreting is a task that requires highly developed working memory skills. You need to be able to retain in your head, maybe for as long as 2 to 4 or 6 seconds, something that was said as you are saying it in the other language and the other person keeps talking. You need to find the translation equivalence of the source language input as fast as you can. You need to be able to keep two streams of processing highly efficiently active in your head as you are producing in one language while at the same time you are comprehending in the other. But when you think about it, reading words fast is not something that's going to be conducive to better interpreting performance. And naming the visual objects that you see will not be very supportive of this expected outcome either. So what happens is that the practice of simultaneous interpreting at large ends up honing, boosting, reinforcing the specific cognitive subdomains that are critically invoked, recruited during the performance of simultaneous interpreting. And when you take a look at the brain, you will see that many of the critical brain regions and networks and circuits that are involved in these domains, they are different. Sometimes you find that interpreters have less, not more, less gray matter density in some of the areas that are critical for this. And that is usually interpreted as a sign of efficiency. When you become good at something, you are able to maximize behavioral outcomes while minimizing the resources that are devoted to the task. So there are, and in our own research, we've seen that there are specific brain frequencies that are modulated differentially between interpreters and non-interpreters when they perform interlinguistic tasks such as translation, but also when they engage in single language tasks, such as single language production.
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting to see that the impact of sustained experience in simultaneous interpreting can impact both on linguistic and non-linguistic skills, insofar as they are relevant to the interpreting task at large. So it's not like interpreting experience will have widespread impact on the whole of your cognitive repertoire, and that, of course, if there is a cognitive effect, that is going to be accompanied by underlying changes in either brain structure or function, and that is exactly what the literature has been revealing so far.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, like I said, it's like a pretty demanding cognitive task. And like you said, you're trying to process language at the same time and like trying to find equivalent, like while you're listening, taking some notes, there are many tasks, let's say, happening at the same time. So that must be, let's say, that would be, let's say, your brain in like overdrive, like your brain going like at its full capacity.
I really like that metaphor. It is your brain in overdrive. And in fact, it's not about, there's something about the cross-linguistic nature of interpreting itself. In fact, if you compare the brain of interpreters when they are doing something that is very, very demanding also, which is shadowing.
Yeah.
So single language shadowing. I'm speaking in English now, and imagine that you have to say everything that I'm saying in English, but with a 2-second lag.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So this is similar to what happens in interpreting, except that you are lacking the cross-linguistic jumps.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, that is very hard. I don't know if you've ever tried it, but shadowing, single language shadowing, it's tremendously difficult. Now, when you compare the levels of activation of shadowing versus in your brain versus spontaneous speech, you have much greater patterns of activation, much more metabolic demands going on in different brain areas that are critical for both linguistic processing and cognitive control processing. But here comes the interesting thing. When you compare actual simultaneous interpreting with shadowing, those increases in brain activity becomes even more pronounced.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not just about the challenging nature of this delayed processing and this taxation of working memory, which is also part of shadowing. There's something that is particularly distinctly hard about doing that in a bilingual brain, jumping from one language to another.
So yeah, I mean, that's why I would like to express my admiration for, well, of course, translators and interpreters, because those both, tasks are pretty, demanding, especially when you have to interpret and also translate, because you have to, there are so many, aspects of your brain that, are functioning. And also, like you said, and also when you talk to other people trying to find a specific, term or specific word, and making decisions, and saying, okay, this is the correct word for this context. Those are pretty demanding tasks. They look simple. They look very simple. When you see people who are good at it, you're like, oh, that looks very easy. It's like, have you ever tried that? It's like, no. So, because it's very, let's say, taxing for your brain.
But the level of ease with which professionals can perform these tasks it really is worth of it's admirable.
Yeah.
I mean, if you take a look at professional, especially well-seasoned interpreters, perform in major conferences in the booth. I mean, I have friends and colleagues who do it, and while they are interpreting, and it's just massive events. I mean, with very highly technical terminology and people who speak very fast, they'll be doing it in the booth while they're painting their nails, for instance. Or while they are sorting, cards with different colors. I mean, they do it because they really, I mean, this is so demanding that if you have to do it while actively making deliberate choices and conscious processing, it becomes unfeasible.
Yeah.
So it's only when you have a high level of automation that you can actually perform at the standards that are required in conference interpreting or other professional settings.
Absolutely. And Adolfo, just like maybe one of the last questions I have for you. We've been seeing like many discussions and arguments and interviews, people talking about artificial intelligence, in terms of language. I don't know if you've seen the case of the, I don't know, Chat GPT, which produces, enormous, pretty academic. You can, basically ask this chat any question and we'll try to, answer it. Do you think that this is going to have an effect?
What I'm doing here is basically I just yeah, I mean, everything that I'm doing now, Jose, is I just typed your questions on Chat GPT. I'm just reading out what the software is telling me to say. Yeah.
And but yeah, me too. I'm writing the questions like, let's say, in the same way. It's like questions for Adolfo Garcia, and it gave me a list of like 20 questions.
Good, good.
And do you think this is going to have an effect on like language teaching and learning? Because for some people it can be a little frightening. People see this with lots of caution.
I mean, how does one answer that? One way to answer that is to look for lessons in the past.
Yeah.
Lessons. So technological developments are neither good nor bad. I mean, they are technological developments.
Yeah.
And then those technological developments, they fall in the hands of people who may use them for more virtuous or less virtuous purposes. Is atomic energy good or is it bad?
Exactly.
I think that we have that kind of scenario. Also, you have people who are technophobes and people who are technophiles. So sometimes, those pre-existing biases will also shape a little bit the opinions that people have on this. But I think that there are many aspects in which this technology, and not just Chat GPT, but other huge language models out there, can be tremendously beneficial. One of the things that we do is to try to find clues of brain health in how people speak.
Yeah.
That's one of our main lines of research, and we do this with different machine learning tools and natural language processing tools. Just a couple of days ago, the first paper came out where people used GPT as the underlying language model to try to find patterns that can discriminate between people with and without Alzheimer's disease. And they find a decent level of classification in the order of 80%. Not the best in the field, not the worst. But there are such virtuous applications. When it comes to teaching, something that I think we will need to be mindful of is essays and written assignments. I mean, it's going to be very, very hard to tell whether something has been produced by an artificial intelligence, or not. Especially because you say, well, I mean, if I'm giving my students a question, and then what they do is they type that question on the GPT platform, and they came up, they get the essay. Maybe you can say, okay, so this is going to be very simple to spot, because what I'm going to do as a teacher is just type the question myself and see what comes out. Exactly. The thing is that there are such easy turnaround, workarounds to that. First of all, if you type the same question, you're not always going to get the same answer. No. Second, you can paraphrase the question if you're smart enough as a student, or come up with little, twists and turns to that question, so that the output can actually be very hard to track. Absolutely. And in any case, the real challenge for students sometimes is going to be, once they have the output from GPT, how to make the grammar worse, or how to make punctuation worse, to make it believable.
Yeah.
But I think this is just like the new rendition of a question that has haunted the teaching profession and many other professions, which is technology. Oh, so now students have access to television; they can listen to English in their homes.
And it's going to have an effect.
How's that going to affect what we do? What if they listen to a different? Oh, they're not going to be listening to received pronunciation now. Oh my God, no, sacrilege. Or I don't know, maybe then the internet. Oh my God, I mean, now they have access to all these things. How are we gonna, come to terms with that? And okay, now it's GPT. I think that what really would be, I do not know how to optimize the use of these technologies, but I do know one thing, that trying to turn a blind eye to that,
Yeah.
pretend that it doesn't exist,
Yeah.
and sort of um, trying to create lessons that prohibit, or they're in a way, sort of create a hard uh, boundary or prescription of that, is going to be a very, very bad move. I
Yeah.
mean, teaching should be about adapting to the new opportunities out there in the world, rather than trying to keep them at bay, so
Yeah.
that our comfort zones can be preserved.
Absolutely. I mean, I showed that to a friend of mine, Jack Warman, who is a philosopher. And yeah, and it was funny because he was like, can you please write a paper quoting two authors, and talking about this logic, and yeah, it was perfect. He said like there were some things that he could improve, but he said like, oh, this is going to be a challenge, for teachers, how to present the information, and let's say what students can do, because it would be, I mean, would not be a good idea, just to say, I mean, you cannot use this. No, it's actually the other way around. It's like how we can take this and actually have students learn from this, like using this tool.
Absolutely, and I think that maybe this is the I guess I'm a very highly pessimistic person by nature, but here's the optimist part of me, sort of uh, emerging now. Uh, Oftentimes, we think about the role of teachers in terms of the resources that teachers have at
Yeah.
their disposal. So lesson plans, are you going to be using this method or this method, this approach or this approach? Are you going to be incorporating technology this way or
Or not.
another? So synchronous classes or not, internet or not? And what really, I think, as technologies evolve, and many of the things that were resource based in teaching are now at the disposal of anybody in their home, what this will really underscore and sort of place the spotlight on is going to be teachers.
Yeah.
That's the one thing that technology will not be able to replace: the actual human being who's there, who's able to come up with these highly spontaneous, on the fly, humorous responses, the empathy of things, who can coordinate things. And I think that insofar as the massive abundance and availability of technology, outside from the specific toolkit that teachers can bring to the learning scenario, becomes so widespread, then we will be faced with the need to revalue the human part of it.
Absolutely.
And that's the one thing that machines will not be able to do. They can emulate that, but machines will be machines by their very nature. So I hope that this sort of brings back uh, a focus on what you can do as an individual, as a human being, to turn those 40 minutes,
To your
1.5
advantage.
hours that you spend with people into something that is neurocognitive, but mainly socially valuable and memorable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, this is like, we cannot just deny the access to technology and say like you cannot use this, because yeah, people are just this is something that's going to be it's part of our lives already. I mean, ChatGPT has gotten a lot of attention. There are so many other models, but people have been playing with it. But yeah, of course, we cannot deny this, that the influence of this, but also the human element still, like, for example, we've seen the same, fears with automatic translation, with Google Translate, or I don't know, DeepL, where you can translate things, but still it needs a human element there to edit, check, and to revise that everything makes sense.
The funny thing is that I can sort of see history repeating itself here.
Yeah.
So a new technology emerges. The first feeling is concern,
Yeah.
worry. Oh my God, what's going to happen now? I mean, it's just going to disrupt
Programmers
everything.
have any jobs, programmers or artists or teachers.
Yeah, we'll all be unemployed.
Yeah.
We won't be able to teach anymore. Students are gonna cheat. As much as they can, they're gonna just surrender their morality to this new technological tool. And then what happens is we have that little moment of chaos and concern and despair. And then what happens is usually a year later, that technology has become part and parcel of what we do. I mean, think about this. I mean, audio recorders, they were not always there. I don't remember the Garden of Eden being played with, Discmans or things like that, right?
Microphones.
Okay, so at the beginning, those things appear, and it's, oh my God, how are we gonna handle this? And you handle that, you incorporate that. Books, I mean, books are technologies, but and they are highly human based and driven and biased technologies, and we take them to be such an internal part of what we do that we no longer question them, right? Now, nobody would question now the use of online resources nowadays, right? If you did, people would call you, oh my God, you're so outdated, right? Well, I mean, give it time. The moment of despair will pass, and this also will become part of our daily toolkit, because basically teaching has evolved by devising and incorporating technologies. It's what's always happened, absolutely always. Some things may not have changed that much, but if you compare how lessons are being taught right now in terms of the devices that are being used to how they were taught 50 years ago, 100 years ago, you see that all the major changes, they don't really have much to do with what is taught, for what purposes they are taught, but just with the technologies that we've used. So give it some time, it'll be fine, we'll survive. Terminator will remain in the future. It's okay.
Absolutely. And just to finish up, Adolfo, what resources and alternatives can you suggest for teachers and students and people who are just like watching or listening to this podcast? A website, maybe an article or a book that you would say, like, this is something that people would check if they would like to learn more about what you do.
So first, if I had to suggest literature for people who want to sort of become immersed in teaching, or rather to see what the contributions from cognitive neuroscience can be to teaching, there are a number of books, but there's one that I'm going to mention, which is Reading in the Brain. It's been translated into Spanish by Editorial Siglo XXI, at least in Argentina, under the title of El Cerebro Lector. This is a book by Stanislas Dehaene, who's a leading neuroscientist, top notch, but also a fantastic disseminator and communicator of science. So if you want to learn about how your brain plays a role in this wonderful cultural development that we humans came up with, which is reading, that would be my go-to book. As to the things that I do, I guess it would be easier if people visited my website.
Absolutely.
Adolfo Garcia at .com.ar for Argentina, .com.ar. And I keep a highly updated record of the different things that we do. And I guess in general, irrespective of who it is that you read, hopefully scientists, it is altogether good for neuroscience to be part of the areas of interest of those of us in the teaching world, and in the EFL teaching or ELT world in general. It would be absolutely wrong to say that neuroscience can provide answers to the questions that have been haunting us as educators for centuries and millennia, but it would be just as wrong to believe that neuroscience is less of a valuable contributor than philosophy, sociology, psychology are. So let's put on an equal opportunity employer hat and let's try to be critical, but also open to the contributions that even the natural sciences can bring to this highly complex interpersonal, but also socio-biological problem that we all care about, which is education and teaching.
So yeah, thank you very much, Adolfo Garcia, for sharing your what you do, your research, your ideas. It's fascinating, the connection between the language and brain. Of course, I'm going to be sharing your website, let's say, on our website, which is www.eltinchile.com. So I'm going to be sharing some of the resources you mentioned. So if people would like to check them out, it'll be, I don't know, excellent for them to see. And if you have any questions or comments, you can reach us at podcast@eltinchile.com. So I don't know if you have any closing remarks. Adolfo, thank you for your time and thank you for accepting my invitation.
Just my gratitude. This is a great initiative. So hats off to you, Jose Luis. And this is fantastic. Keep doing this. We need these sorts of outlets for all of us to be able to tell, to share what we do. But what you mentioned right now, I mean, to have channels of communication for people to keep, bringing questions and sharing ideas or queries, that is fantastic. We need more of that. So thank you for allowing me to be a part of this.
No, thank you for your time. And of course, I usually have, and this is something that, let's say that you mentioned, Adolfo, that people, experts in the area, like there's a distance between, what people do at universities and, what people do, for example, at schools. But let's say in my experience, everybody like to share what they do. Everybody likes to talk about what they do, and sometimes there's not like space for them to do so, besides like you see a book and you're like, okay, I'm going to read it. But it's different, let's say, talking to the person who's written the book.
Absolutely. And you also sort of demystify that person, right? I mean, you see a name on a book and it's so impressive, right? And then you actually see the guy talk and you say, hey, I mean, I can relate to this. And you also realize that there's the only distance between someone who's published a book and you, if you haven't, is that person has published a book. I mean, there's that's all there is to it. So this is great, and I hope that there is some level of inspiration and motivation for others to take out what they do and what they know out there.
Absolutely. So thank you very much, Adolfo.
Till next time. Thank you.